part of our role is basically we work with customers in adopting Docker inside their organization, either if you're just initially starting to adopt Docker, or if you're already using Docker in your organization, we then see how we can take it to the next stage of moving it into production with all the bells and whistles and everything, right? So today's topic, what we're going to be talking about is the economic impact of migrating Windows Server 2008 with Docker. So Scott talked a little bit about it, and that's going to be the focus of this. How can you address these challenges which you're having so that if your applications are still running on 2003, 2008 is running end of support, how can we move them and use them with Docker right out of the box? So that's going to be the focus of today's presentation, okay? So just begin with April 14th, 2019. What's so significant about this date? Anybody? No, Game of Thrones Season 8. Yeah. So, and if you're not a fan of Game of Thrones, then let's talk outside. I can do some therapy sessions or whatever, but please remember that in mind. The second most important thing, January 14th, 2020, right? Why is this important? Three things. First is end of support for Microsoft Windows Server 2008 is coming to an end, right? So you're basically having end of standard support on 2008, end of security patches, unless you've paid enough to like extend 2008 for some more time, and then end of hot fixes, right? So pretty much if you're running stuff in the production, you saw the numbers of the number of applications that was running in production, this poses a huge, huge challenge, right? Scott brought up this piece, right? So how important having patches and security fixes when you're running stuff in production is. This specific example, this happened in 2018 May. It's not specific to Windows, but however, it affected about 65 countries globally just because of one security vulnerability, right? So it's always important to run these patches and run these systems which are up to date and make sure you have the fixes either at an OS level, an engine level, or an image level, container level, right? So the other thing is that maintaining these legacy apps is also a drain on innovation, right? 80-20 rule, how long has it been around, right? Because what you're doing is now you're still just having these applications running on 2008. You have multiple stacks to actually manage and maintain. So you're just simply spending your time on keeping the lights on, right? And so now you have to spend more and more on maintaining them, keeping them up to date, and just putting patches and making sure things just work together. And then, because of this, you cannot roll out new application changes. You can't move into the next stage of CI/CD, all those deployments that you want to be able to go do, because you're still stuck in the same cycle repeatedly again and again and again, and this is taking away your cycles. So, and why is that? It's not like we are the first people who recognized it. People have seen it, but why did they not do it? Because it's actually complicated and costly, right? First is fragile dependencies, right? As most of you know, the number of dependencies that can exist. If this version of 2003 R1, then do this. If this version of 2008 R2, then do this. The if loop and the flow chart can get as much bigger and bigger as you want, right? So difficult to patch and maintain these things. And it's also static and difficult to move because now you have this application that's so tightly coupled to the operating system and everything that's running inside the operating system on a VM, on a server, or on a cloud instance, that it becomes very difficult to move. The second thing is lost knowledge. 2008, not sure in how many companies the people who actually wrote that application in 2008 are still sticking around here maintaining those applications. If you're sure, then actually I commend those guys and that team over there, right? So the second thing is the number of Windows Server 2008 applications, like we talked about, right? Almost 70% of them are still running it in production. And then the last thing is high effort. Taking these applications, recoding them, restructuring them, and like breaking it down and writing it into the new cloud native takes a lot of work. And not only that, now you have to apply testing, fixes, make sure all these things work like how it was doing before. So all these things are the reasons why people have kind of like shied away from these things. So how can we change it? So that's what we're trying to do with Docker, and we've been using with a lot of customers, right? So we provide this program called as the MTA, which has been highlighted throughout the event, Modernized Traditional Application. So it's basically for Windows Server application migration that you want to be able to go do. So we provide three basic things as part of this program. First is the platform. As you must have seen in the keynote, Docker Enterprise Edition as the platform, because it provides you a way for you to run multiple components on top of it, whether it's a legacy application, microservices, whatever. Once you moved it into a container, now you can run it. But that's not enough, right? Just running a container on an engine is not enough. You need all the bells and whistles around it. That's what the enterprise platform provides. Second, tools and services. All the tools that are required, monitoring, logging, all those things that we want to be able to set up, those are also going to be helping, and so you can actually use them to actually migrate these things. And then finally, once you have these two things, now you can start focusing on, because you have a platform, you have the whole ecosystem built around it, you can actually focus on building new applications rather than just trying to keep the lights on again and again. So, what are the options actually you have today for moving these legacy applications from Windows Server 2008? One, in-place upgrade, right? So which is just take the 2003, spin it away, put a new Windows Server 2016 or a 2019, and try to do that. But what are the issues with that? It requires a lot of engineering resources, and you need people who are still there with the familiarity of the application and the dependencies that existed, so you can go back and recreate them on it. And then guess what? Once you've upgraded it, you need to do the same process again after a point, because you're not actually moving the application at all. The second thing is extended support contract. Just go back and say, hey, can I extend this after 2020? Yes, you could, but you're going to be paying more than about, just extend, it's very, very expensive, and the price we have is about 75% of just the license cost of the operating system is what you need to pay on support. And at this point, all you're doing is you're kicking it down the road for another couple of years, and then you're going to come back in another summit over here, and we're going to talk about the same thing again. So the third option, which we're recommending, and we've actually seen with customers, we've done it with customers, is actually containerize this with Docker, right? So now what the option you get is you're taking the application as is and moving it to a newer operating system. So now you get all the benefits of Docker along with a new operating system, which is 2016 or 1709, 1803, Windows Server 8, 2019. These are the four that's out there and supported by the Docker Enterprise Edition platform. Second, now that you have the application in actually a container, you can do everything that you wanted to do with Docker. You want to move it to the cloud, you want to do a CI/CD deployment, you want to do blue-green deployments, rolling updates, all those things that you wanted to do, you get that as well. And then finally, now you're future-proofing your application. Because now you have version 1, you can start creating version 2, version 3, which is just multiple Docker images, and you can update them the way you want it. So let's look at these three options and look at the economic pricing behind it, or the 3-year TCO that we've done on this. So you can see I've listed all the three options over here, right? We talked about the in-place upgrade, we talked about extending support, and Docker Enterprise. So first, what's common between all these things is that the infrastructure costs, the maintenance and staffing, and the Windows licensing, right? Those three things are anyway needed. But how much you're going to be spending upon these three is what's going to change across this. And of course, in the next two, you're also going to have the migration cost, which is also associated with this. So first, if you look at the extending support piece, right, and compare it to the Docker Enterprise Edition, you can see a 7.5 to a 5.2. So almost 31% cheaper when you're actually using the Docker Enterprise platform to go do this rather than just extending it. And why is that? Because once, even from an infrastructure perspective, you've already moved these things in containers. So you need lesser number of infrastructure to actually run it. You can pack in multiple containers per VM or per Docker engine. And then maintenance and staffing as well. Your OpEx also goes down because now you don't need to keep maintaining all these things, and it's much more easier to maintain all your containers, easier because once you have the automated CI/CD and everything done, you can completely reduce the costs associated with it. On the second one, in-place upgrade, we're seeing a 22% decrease as well when you're using a Docker Enterprise versus in-place upgrades, because the licensing cost again goes up, the maintenance and staffing goes up. In fact, the maintenance and staffing on this is going to be the highest because now you have to do the entire stack all over again. So we're going to look at each of those bullets on this. The first thing is 40% difference when you're simply getting from the infrastructure. So you saw all those four boxes that we saw on the previous slide. I'm going to be walking through one of each of them. So you see actual pricing numbers, which we've done. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to see almost up to 40%. And this is me being conservative, right? I mean, so Scott talked about some of the customers like Visa, PayPal, these are all my customers. They're seeing about 60 to 70% of number of server reductions that they've actually seen when they're doing a migration into containers. The second thing is also maintenance becomes much, much easier because now, let me give you this example. If you're simply just running an application, say, inside a VM, not inside a container, the number of tools you have to just install just to maintain those things, and just because it's a VM, is huge. A lot of those things go away when you actually move into containers because, for example, there's no such thing as patching a container. You don't patch a container, you kill a container and you bring up a new container. So when you move to those things, a lot of this cost goes down. The second thing is licensing. Again, very simply here, because you're simply just extending the support over there, and you're not moving it to a later version of the 2016, and you're able to run more number of containers associated with this on the lesser number of things, the pricing also goes down when you're associated over here. Like we said, we talked about 70% pricing is how much you have to pay for extending your support when you're comparing to just the license cost with Windows. And then finally, now this is the cost, right? This is the migration cost, which you have to spend one time to actually move the applications to Docker. So that's the one-time cost you have to actually do, but you have to keep in mind from the Docker Enterprise point, this includes training, support, actually moving your applications into it, actually having the platform spun up, and a bunch of nodes that's running in this. So this is a full cost that you're going to associate with it. But the main result is when you add all these costs together, moving it into Docker and deploying it on a platform like Docker Enterprise is much, much cheaper, as these numbers are actually going to show. So that's the first benefits you start seeing. After that, you're still going to see future and ongoing benefits of Docker, right? First up, you're going to see a lot of productivity gains. Agility, you can deploy and scale in minutes right now. Actually, not even minutes. You can do it in seconds, and microseconds is how much longer it takes for the containers to come up and go down. Portability, we talked about. If you have a cloud strategy, you have a hybrid strategy, you can move it wherever you want. Most of the customers they have a hybrid strategy. They don't want to be locked into one cloud provider, or they want to have an on-prem and a cloud, and they want to be able to move these applications wherever they want. Docker provides an easy way for you to move these things as well. And then finally, security as well, right? I mean, everybody knows, right? I mean, Gartner actually called it out. If you run an application as is, versus take that application and put it in a Docker container, the application inside the Docker container is much, much secure. Because guess what? You're reducing the attack surface completely by putting it inside a container. And then ongoing benefits. We talked about patching and software updates. Once you have a CI/CD cycle and you have all these things automated, it becomes much, much simpler to bring down these applications and put newer versions on it. Ability to modernize legacy apps by adding new microservices, and then adopt new technology stacks. Because now, pretty much, in fact, I'm seeing with a lot of the customers, they are asking their vendors to ship everything as Docker images to them. It's much easier. Once you ship them as a Docker image, you pull it, you run it on your cluster as a Docker run, and you're good to go. And now that service can start talking to the rest of your other services, right? And cloud portability is what I already touched before this. So the program, like I said, it basically these three components where you have the platform, the tools and the services, and once you have this, now provides a foundation for innovation. So Gary talked about the platform, which is Docker Enterprise Edition. He gave a brief overview of the things that was there. So I'm not going to go too deep into it, but I'll touch on the three pillars which the platform brings to you, which is choice, agility, and security, right? So from a security perspective, we talked about control code deployment, and threat scanning, secrets management, right? So I simply talk about three things for you to remember. That's SSS, right? Signing, scanning, secrets. You can sign an image, so now you can make sure that only your signed images by your company are used in this. How many numbers did we come up with? 40, 50 billion Docker images out there, 56, 70 billion images out there. You don't want to pull everything and just run it inside your production. You want to be able to pull it, and you want to sign it, and you want to say, okay, only if this is signed by my company can it run inside my cluster. And then scanning is also something we talked about, where you can actually, once an application is pushed, a scanning service runs, and it tells you if there's any known vulnerability or not. And if there is a vulnerability, then don't run the container. Then don't run that image and use the container. And then finally, secrets management, right? So humans are to passwords as applications is to secrets, right? Just like you have passwords, an application needs to authenticate with some database or whatever. You don't want to store those secrets in your Docker file. So we provide Docker secrets right out of the way. And then, of course, I don't know why this keeps doing this, but cool. And then image management, secrets management, and then role-based authentication control all comes built out of the box. The second thing is governance, right? So role-based authentication control with universal control plane, which is our orchestration platform, and Docker Trusted Registry where you store the images. So now you can say, okay, I want only these teams to be able to deploy on these nodes and during this time frame and only on these networks and these clusters. Then you can also have controlled code deployment. You can actually say, if it is not signed, then don't run it on these nodes. So I can have, for example, labels and constraints where I can say, okay, these needs to only run on Windows nodes. These need to run only on Linux nodes. And this can be run only in production, and this can only be run in pre-prod, etc. The third thing is automation, right? So orchestration, along with that, builds you the entire automation on this. So if you have a security vulnerability, you should be able to just send back another image in it, bring down these containers, and bring it up, depending upon whatever type of deployments you want to be able to go use. You can use a blue-green deployment, you can use canary deployments, all those things come out of the thing. And then support and certification, right? With the platform, you also get enterprise-grade support. How many of you guys update the engine every day? Every month? Every 6 months? Okay, there you go. So that's the whole point, right? Because we have a version of the open source engine that comes out once every 2 to 3 months, right? We're not going to be updating that in production all the time. So having an enterprise version of the engine with support, which can backport fixes and support up to a year so that you can run these things, become very, 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 very important. So we talked about Visa, who's one of my customers, right? So they're still running on about 6 to 8 months old version of the engine, but we backported a bunch of fixes, even both security on this, because they just don't want to go update everything just because a new engine came out as well. And this is something we're really, really proud of, which is the Forrester report, right? Forrester came out and said that we are the leader in the enterprise container platform report. So this was huge. I mean, most of you guys have heard of this competition, like Red Hat, Pivotal, Rancher Labs, all these people in the market. But we got because of the three main pillars that we got about. We're not locked in, right? Agility. We don't care where you run it. Portability and the security pieces, right? So all these three were key initiatives that were this. So how do we go about doing this and migrating these applications? So I have a talk after this at 4 o'clock where I'm going to go much more detail into this ones, which is about how do you go around this. But very quickly, what we do with our services team is we come there and we first do a discovery phase where we look at all the applications that we have. And then we say, okay, these applications make sense. Let's take these applications. Let's go do this. Then we take them and we operationalize them using Docker Enterprise, put them in containers, and then deploy it, and then we enable you. The enabling part is important because here, we're actually teaching you to fish, right? We're telling you how you can do this with first 2 to 3 apps, because after that, you can go take the next 100 apps and do it yourself, right? So training and certification, and then a technical account manager is somebody like another technical person who stays with you on a proactive basis, looks out for you, looks out for your environment, brings in any patches, anything that you want to do this. And once you have these, once you build this application, guess what? You've done a lot of the work, because the Docker Enterprise platform not only supports those traditional applications which we were talking about that you moved, you can also run your microservice environment because it's in a container. So now you can run these microservices, and then when you start expanding to edge or IoT or any of your like blockchain, serverless, pretty much all that can be done with this one platform, independent of the infrastructure that you want to do. So you're not only like solving the problem of like how do I get rid of the 2008 and move it here, but you're also making sure you're future-proofing yourself for the next set of applications and innovation that comes out. So with that, let's jump into a demo. All right, cool. So this is a Windows 2000. Let me make this a little bigger for you guys. It's a little better. Can make it a little bit more. Okay, cool, it's better. So this is a Windows 2003 R2 system. And what we have running here is So go to localhost. And it's basically an IIS-7 app base over here. But what I also have that's running over here is a 2008 application. So this is an ASP.NET 2.0 application that was written in 2008. It still stays in 2008. It's talking to a SQL Server backend. This is the early versions of Indeed, if anybody remembers this thing. This is basically a simple job site. You can go post your resume. You can search for jobs, all those things. This was written in 2008, and nobody touched it after that, right? So that's the application that's running. So let's go look at so what I'm going to show you now is, I just moved it into the IIS Manager page, and you can see that this entire thing is in an application pool. So this is the jobs application pool, which is where this application has been created. So it consists of a front-end web, which was written in ASP.NET, which is talking to a back-end, which is SQL Server, and it's using, for identity, it's using a job service. So it's basically using an authentication using Active Directory to be authenticated back and be able to do this. Now, there's multiple ways you can actually move this into 2016, right? You can spend resources, you can take this application, you can create a Docker file, you can do all that stuff. Or we built a tool called DAC, right? And DAC stands for Docker Application Converter, right? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run the DAC tool on a Windows Server 2003 and see what happens. So all that I'm doing is I'm running DAC. I'm saying discover the entire file system starting from the C drive. Cool. So basically what it did is it said, I ran the Docker Application Converter, and it says, specify the default discovery mode. I'm going to say 1. Do that. Now let's watch this carefully. So what is it doing? It said it discovered the operating system. It said I found a Windows Server 2008 R2. It said I'm going to try and detect if I have these kinds of applications on your server. It searched, it did not find any Tomcat. It looked at this and it said, oh, cool. I found IIS applications, discovered 2 instances of that. It searched all that and it said, hey, I have these 2 applications. Do you want to Dockerize it? So I say yes. And then it's saying, which one do you want? We'll choose the job application. I'll say done. Okay, cool. So it says it's created all this and it's thrown it under session 1, application jobs. So let's go there. Sessions, session 1, applications, IIS 1, jobs. So you see here, it generated a Docker file. So simply just by running by the tool, it went, it did a discovery, and now it's generated a Docker file. So let's open this. With Notepad, and it walks you through the entire Docker file. Now I'm going to show this to you once I move it to 2016 in a clearer format, because I just wanted to show you here that I'm not bluffing. Now what I'm going to do is I'm copying all these files and moved it to 2016, because you need a minimum 2016 to run Docker, right? But just for the interest of time, I've already moved it. So let's go to the 2016 server. Got it. So just to show you, it's the same set of files. And then let's look at the Docker file over here. Okay. So what am I doing over here? It's a very simple Docker file. I'm using a simple base image, a Microsoft ASP.NET Windows Server Core LTSC 2016. So that's the base image that I'm actually going to be using. And this is the cool part, right? DAC was able to intellectually detect that it needed a Windows Server Core, and you're going to be able to go use it. If you're using a new application, I would use a different base image, like Windows Nano Server, right? So DAC is intelligent enough to detect that, and it generated this over this. Then all I'm saying is, okay, run this, remove this default website. And here's the cool part. DAC was able to detect and say, these are all the IIS components that I want to be able to go do. Now this is a chance for you to say, look at this and be like, you know what? These 20 things, these 12 probably don't make any more sense, right? You can do all those changes over here, and you can do that, right? So basically done that. I'm saying expose it on port 8080, and then copy jobs, and that's about it. So now let's go run it. So all I would do is, I've taken this Docker file. You can see it's in the same directory, right? It's the same thing as the same. I did a Docker image just to show you that I already don't have the images before. I'm not bluffing, so I'm going to build the job right now. So obviously it was faster because it's building it from cache. So let's see what it did. It went through the Docker file, and it actually built the image. So now if I do a Docker images, you see, that's the job. It's based on my name, and it just built the job right there, right? So now what we have to do is we simply have to run it, right? Actually, let me bring it up so it's easier for you guys. So cool. So now I'm basically doing it. I do a docker ps. You can see just spin up the container right now, 5 seconds ago. So let's go launch it. Oh, sorry. That's the cool thing. So there's one thing about Windows is now we need to find out what's the IP that it's actually running on, and that's just a Windows thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this, which is basically going to print out the IP for me. So let's do that, and cool. So it's 172.20.132, and it brings up the container. And it fails because it's not able to authenticate to the SQL Server in the backend, right? The authentication there was different. The authentication here is different. So in 2016, how does authentication work? So there's a concept of GMSA that exists. I mean, it's been there in the Windows directory, Active Directory for quite some time. So that's how we use a container to do more of a a passwordless kind of authentication for the container to be able to go do that. So what we need to do now is we need to add that authentication pieces into the container so that it can actually authenticate back to the SQL Server, and then it can actually be able to do that. So that's what we're going to do next. So what I'm going to do is let's go here. So kill that container. Cool. So now we're going to go here. So what we're going to do is, in the interest of time, I've already done this, but pretty much what I've done is I've already created a GMSA, right? So I've created a new service account. Then at the end of that, you create a new credential spec, and that's the spec that is actually going to be using to go and authenticate with it. And then after that, you can actually view it over here. If we have time, we can come back to the credential spec over here. And now all I'm doing is you can see that I'm using the same command, but I'm just adding the security options over here and the host name that I want to be able to run it on. So if I simply just run this and keep my fingers crossed, it should work. Cool, so it's created the container. Let's check it out. Yep, successfully created. Now let's launch it. This is the same command, by the way. This is just to find the IP. And boom. So now it launched this. This is typically when people clap. So thanks. All right, good, thanks. So what did we do, right? We moved the application, Windows Server 2008 that was running. We took the application, we used Docker Application Converter. We moved the application as is with 0 code changes, and we moved it to a Windows Server 2016, and we ran it out of the box, right? How cool is that? That's the kind of stuff we're actually doing, and that's the whole MTA pitch that we've been talking about. So now, after you migrated this, now you can do all the cool bells and whistles you want. Now you've had the application running, so you can go and say, I want to trim my Docker file. I don't want to take out all these things. I don't want to use this authentication. All those things can be done once you've actually moved it to this. I think somebody from Facebook already saw our demo, so this whole 10-year challenge that's happening in Facebook about like that's based on this demo, actually. Cool. So going back to our slides, now that we finished the demo. So who's a customer who's successfully done it? Jabil is a customer. We talked about that. They actually wanted to, the key challenge was because they were getting a lot of customer needs and they wanted to be able to like, hey, how can we innovate faster? How can we move these things faster? How can we apply patches faster? So they went through this MTA and they're actually running a Windows application and they're actually moving it to Azure, right? So for those of you who don't know, Jabil, basically they're a leading manufacturing solution provider and they have about 100 sites in 29 countries, right? So a lot of organizations out there, they have a cloud-first strategy when it comes to modernizing their technology infrastructure. So they are using Docker Enterprise Edition, the platform that we've been talking about, and they migrate over 100 legacy .NET applications to the Azure cloud, right? Again, in the Azure cloud, you just simply spin up an instance, have a Docker engine, extend the platform, and then you're able to run it over there. So now they've been able to accelerate their cloud migration strategy, and also they're able to distribute their software 60% faster globally across all these sites, right? Because now you just have them as Docker images, so you can take them and you can start pushing it wherever you want. So to wrap it up, what's the Windows Server application migration program? We can containerize and secure your legacy applications without having to recode it, right? No 12-factor, you don't have to go and change all those things. You can move the application as is, protect yourself from security risk because now you're running on a newer kernel and you have all the patches and everything that comes out. You can go run it on that. You can future-proof your legacy applications, and also you can start reducing your application costs overall. So how do you get started? First, here's some information out there. You can actually go try out a hosted trial at trial.docker.com, or you can start, after this, I think there's another workshop that gets on there. They're doing some MTA workshops associated with that as well. But if you're one of those guys who wants to play on your own, please go to the hosted trial, or come talk to one of us, right? So we've been doing this for like 3-4 years. Like personally, I've been with Docker for about 4 years now. So I almost worked with all the commercial customers that Docker have, and I speak at most of the meetups as well. So come talk to all of us. And then there's all these reports that's out there, right? So we have the Forrester Container Report in those links, and all this will be published. So you should be able to help from there. And that's the end. Thank you. Oh, questions?
Have you heard any certified Windows apps that you failed on?
Let me give you the quick answer is so any GUI, say UI, laptop, those kind of applications, we're typically not ready there yet. So I wouldn't even go there. It's just more of a Docker Microsoft thing. We just are not there. We started to go after the backend applications because we felt that's more suitable on this. My next talk, actually, I'm going to be walking through some of the archetypes, because one of the cool things about Windows apps is about 80 to 90% of them follow the same pattern. It's either it's a two-tier or a two-tier with authentication. Three-tier with authentication. So within those archetypes, when you start putting them together, we're able to cover about 80 to 85%. There's always going to be some which is more complicated and you cannot do that. We go out of the way and see what pieces make sense and do it over there. But to start with, I would stay away from GUI apps if that's your question. Yes, sir.
How does it work for stateful applications that are just pulling things out of a database, shuffling them, putting them back in a database? If they're encapsulating local caches of data or reaching out to other third-party systems, does that, obviously it complicates it. Does it complicate it too much to do?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? So, you'd have to look at those things on a case-by-case basis on that, right? That's why when you spit out the Docker file, it tells you pretty much what sort of dependencies that I have and what of them makes more sense on it. And that's when you start, even if it's going to have dependencies associated with it, we can almost separate that out and say, I want to only Dockerize these pieces, let them continue to talk back to those things. Visa is a perfect example. We talked about the e-commerce application, right? So just quick thing, because personally it's my account, so I like to talk about it. So it's the e-commerce application, right? So today, if you're using your Visa credit card online, you go to Amazon or iTunes or Facebook and buy that, it goes through the Docker EE platform, right? Their Cyber Monday traffic was 100 million transactions that they entirely ran on the Docker EE platform on it. So they started the journey back in 2015. Again, they have a front end, which is a Java application. Back end is Oracle. Thank God they're not taking Oracle and putting it in a Docker container, and please do not do that if somebody's looking at it in production. You want to play it on your laptop, do it, but don't do it in production. They've only Dockerized the Java piece, and then slowly they're starting to take other pieces and do it. So we always look at it on a case-by-case basis, and then we can decide how we want to go do that. Yes, sir?
What forms of authentication are supported on Windows Docker?
Yeah, so right now, I mean, you can use the standard, just username, password authentication if you want to do that. Or for the most part, what we are seeing with customers is they're going the AD route because just in general, Windows is so tied to the authentication with respect to on the AD side. So GMSA is one of the biggest things that we're using. That's the authentication that's being used for containers with Docker, for the most part on Windows.
What about Kerberos?
Kerberos, I'm not seeing that a lot come up at this point, but I'm seeing some of that come up on the Linux side.
How can you make your container to join the Active Directory domain?
Yeah, so that's the whole concept of GMSA, where you will create a separate AD account. So I just skipped through that. I didn't do it on the CLI, but you will create the AD account for that. You'll have to create a new account for it, and then you will authenticate.
Is that the service account? Or
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so as long as we have a service account.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
What is the difference between image to Docker and Docker application?
Good point. So image to Docker was one of the first versions, right? I think we came out with that about 2.5 to 3 years back. Think of this as a 2.0 version of, we started off with that, and we open sourced that piece. This is more built on, it had a lot of restrictions on what you could and could not do. And this, we've been like testing it with customers continuously and saying, oh, we need to do this. We need, like things like GMSA and stuff, image to Docker doesn't do, right? So all those kind of lessons learned that we built, we went back and built this Docker application tool associated with it. Yeah, so this is part of the enterprise edition. So what happens is, this is not something we typically give out. So this is part of the professional services team. When they come, they run this on your thing, and then they look through the Docker file, and then they work with you and try to see how they can optimize it. Yes, sir?
So your cost was based on 100 Windows servers.
Yeah.
You have 1,000. I know the extended support would increase. I think they're sold in groups of 100 or something like that. But with your Docker, your far right graph, would that increase as well?
I mean, there will be an increase, but it'll be a relative increase, right? Because like if this increasing it at 2 or 3x points, because once you're moving to 1,000 apps, which means your VM cost is going to go up, which means your Windows license cost is going to go up. So now you're looking at 1,000 apps across 1,000 VMs when you're running it in the traditional way. Whereas here, even if you're going to go to 1,000 apps, it could increase, but it also there's a chance that it won't increase at all. Because what if you could take those 1,000 apps, if they're small apps, you could pack them up into containers and you could still run them on the same number of nodes, then the cost won't increase, right?
So there's increase, but not the same scale
Absolutely,
as the Microsoft.
100%, yeah. Yep.
So we noticed the Docker file was like 14-something gigabytes. Is that something you can bring down if you do some tweaking, or is that?
Oh, we can always tweak Docker files. That's my side project, what I do on Sundays. So yeah, absolutely, yeah. And that's the thing, right? That's the cool part too, because once I can't tell you how many times I've sat with customers and we look at the Docker file, and then when I'm sitting with the application people and the people who want to do this, they're like, oh my God, we got so much crap in this VM. And then we take out like so many stuff into it, and then you can actually start like reducing just those components that doesn't make any more sense. Like even what I showed you, I deliberately didn't remove those things because I want to show you how much of that was there, but you can always take off those things and trim it to how much ever you want. And also Microsoft is also getting much, much better from where we started in 2016, right? I mean, the image sizes are also getting considerably, 2019, it's amazing, right? So it's like anything else. We all learn through those things, and so yeah. Yes, sir. Windows service, give me an example. Which specifically are you talking about?
We have a lot of Windows services which process files in the background.
Yeah, I mean, see, anything you can do, right? I mean, basically you want to see if you want to do that on this. If something is already a Microsoft service itself, then I would just say, for example, don't take SQL Server now and try to move it on your own. There's already a SQL Server image out there. So you can just take that SQL Server and just run it as a Docker container. So if there's a service already out there, that's why I want to see what kind of service it is. If there is a Docker image that's there, we could use it. Otherwise, we can still. Custom one, yeah, so then absolutely. I mean, we can look into doing that. And then you will have to just use the files and then mount them as volumes or with whatever backend storage you want to be use or any other plugins you want to be able to go use.
But you won't be running as a Windows service in the container, right? So it will be running as something else.
You could still run it as a Windows service in a container. Yeah, absolutely.
For the conversion process, if an external data store for the website info and everything, will it work with that? Or?
Yeah, so I think that's back to the question like kind of he was asking about on that. So we can obviously look at it on a case-by-case basis. You still, I mean, in the end, what you're doing is if it is talking to a data store, this application, now it's inside a container, and from there it still has to talk back to the data store, right? You typically don't move the data store also inside the same container. That's not something I would recommend. You would keep them out as separately, and then they will still talk back to the data store. Yeah. Yeah.
So how much it costs? Like,
What?
how much it costs to have somebody from Docker actually visit our company and do some couple of conversions?
Yeah, great. So all the sales guys out there, we'll make sure we get you there. I'm an SC, so I don't know pricing, but depending upon how nice you are to us, we can talk about discounts. So, yes, sir.
IIS case you did, you would still manage that with the legacy management, or would you use the newer IIS?
I mean, you would use the new one, right? Yeah, because I mean, the goal is once you moved away from there, you want to like say goodbye to it at some point, right? That's the whole goal over here. So once you move inside this, it's going to make it work along with the components in the new 2016 out of it. Now, if you have other components that's connected back, like the data store or whatever, you still have to talk back to them. But once you move to 2016, you want to work with the 2016 components.
Does your version like help you with like certificates and DNS? Do you still have that issue?
Well, I mean, that's a little outside, right? Because you still have to make sure it works with, but when you're working it with the platform, because all this is doing is it's helping you move the application into a Docker container, right? Now, you saw how I had to find out the actual IP on which it was exposing it using a separate command on that. You still need to do those things outside of it because networking is, again, it's the underlying layer, right? It's it's below the container layer. So you still have to make sure those things operate and you have a DNS and all those things associated with it. In fact, that's exactly why I ran that command because like I just couldn't go to localhost. I had to find the IP to actually do that. Yes, sir.
So for
You have to make a purchase before you go today for the number of questions. Yeah, no, go for it. I'm just kidding.
So, I mean, we still have some application running with COM objects. How can you convert those COM objects?
Yeah, I mean, again, Microsoft, that's the thing, right? Say COM, COTS, all those apps. It's like you all have to look at this on a case-by-case basis. So that's why, like in my next talk, when I'm talking about the different archetypes, I'll walk in terms of like low complexity to like the highest complexity that you want. And that's where the transition. The easiest is 2-tier and no authentication. The next easier, 2-tier with authentication. Then 3-tier authentication, then you have a presentation layer. So it goes like that. And then I would say in the end of the spectrum, the end is the COTS, the COM objects, and like services. All those things are like the ones I would put in the last bucket associated with it. So everything can be done. It just takes time to do it, right? So. Cool. Thanks, guys.